One of the most harrowing stories in the Spider-Man universe is when former girlfriend Gwen Stacy dies. And however shocking or controversial this may seem, I proved it entirely by accident. If you want the story, I'll tell you, but we gotta go to the beginning, the very beginning. In 1920, my father was a dress cutter who didn't get that much work. So my family had to live through financial difficulties in a one-bedroom apartment. Now picture this. You have 4 people, 2 rowdy brothers, and a father who has to stay home, and he's kind of sad because he can't get work and support his family. That's a recipe for disaster right there. Now, even though we were attending difficulties, I attended the DeWitt Clinton High School and worked side jobs like writing obituaries for a press service or national releases for the National Tuberculosis Center and working as an office boy. Then in 1939, I went on to be hired as an office worker for Timely Comics, which was later known as Atlas Comics. Then in 1940, I became an interim editor. It was around this time, in World War II, that I worked as a playwright in the Signal Corps, writing training films, manuals, and slogans. Man, I love my slogans. Now, when I got back in the 1960s, my boss came to me and he said, "Hey, Stan, we need you to make," why am I giving him this accent? "Hey, Stan, we need you to make a comic series that can rival the DC Comics hit title, The Justice League of America." I said, "Okay, I'll do my best." And citing writing influences like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Jules Verne, and following encouragement of my wife Joan, I did away with some of the classic comic conventions. And with co-creator Jack Kirby, the Fantastic Four was born. It was a hit. In following the success of the Fantastic Four, I created more characters. You might have heard of them, such as Hulk, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Daredevil, and the X-Men. Have you heard of them?
Yes.
Then I was also known for many things, like imbuing my characters with a sense of humanism. Like Spider-Man, he has to combine his life as a superhero and his life as a teenage boy. He has a girlfriend, an aunt who's dealt with loss of his uncle. His uncle is gone, and his boss, J. Jonah Jameson, hates his other identity, Spider-Man. Spider-Man has to fight the Vulture, Mysterio, like I said before, the sense of humanism. I was also known for tackling real-world issues in my comics, such as bigotry and drug use, which would influence comics for decades. Then I became producer and the editor for Atlas Comics, now known as Marvel Comics. Have you guys heard of them? Then I moved to West Coast to follow Marvel's film ventures, such as Iron Man and the Avengers. You guys have seen this movie, right? I hope so. Following that, I became the chairman emeritus, or the face of Marvel. I attended Comic Cons, college lectures, and panel discussions all around America. Then, in 2006, at the age of 83, I believe, I left Marvel. Now, you want to know the story about Gwen Stacy? I'll tell you. In a rush to get to Europe for a business trip, my editor, Roy Thomas, my writer, John Romita, and my illustrator, Jerry Conway, they all came to me with the idea, "Hey, what if we kill Gwen Stacy?" And the idiot I was, packing all of my things, I said, "Do whatever makes you happy. I gotta get to a plane." And what happened next shocked America, and then shocked Stan. Now, Even though I've had amazing success all throughout my career, I've had problems such as the Gwen Stacy incident, we're just gonna call it that, and any other mishap that I might have had. I can't name them all, there's too many. So you should always remember that comics are like storytelling. It's like novels or anything else. The first thing you have to do is become a good storyteller. Now, speaking of planes, I have to get to a plane. So before I go, do any of you have any questions?
Over many thousands of years, every species has evolved, adapting to better fit its environment. Just as, over time, a man evolves, learning and getting better at learning as he grows older. When I was very young and had learned very little, I would wander my family's estate in Shrewsbury, collecting every different kind of rock on the pathway up to the house, finding beetles and bugs, and going on walks with my father. But my happy fantasy of life was shattered when I was 9. My mother died. The next year, I was sent off to Shrewsbury Grammar School. It was terrible. The older boys carried around loaded guns. The food was terrible, and beatings were frequent. Sometimes I would sneak away, hiding in the backyard shed of our home and doing chemistry experiments with my brother Raz. We had great times, but when I was 13, Raz was sent away to a different school, and I was stuck spending 3 long, lonely years at Shrewsbury. Eventually, my father realized how badly I was faring there, and he pulled Raz and I both out of school and sent us off to Edinburgh to become doctors. After my first year at Edinburgh, I learned one thing. I didn't want to be a doctor. But not wanting to upset my father, I went back the next year. After my second year at Edinburgh, I decided I didn't want to go there anymore and approached him one night. Father, I don't want to go to Edinburgh anymore. I don't want to become a doctor. He was furious. What do you mean you don't want to become a doctor, Charles? What do you want to do with your life? Hunt and play and sport? You're a disgrace to the Darwin name. Discouraged by my father's words, this was one of the low points of my life. Eventually, my father did let me quit Edinburgh, but if I wasn't going to be a doctor, then I was going to be a clergyman. So the next year, I was sent off to Cambridge to study theology. These years at Cambridge were some of my happiest. Not long into the first year, I took up beetle collecting. I became obsessed with it, really obsessed. I remember one day, I was walking along, my collecting tin in my left hand. I walked up to a tree, set the tin down, and ripped off a strip of bark. Nothing. I walked over to the next tree, ripped off a strip of bark. Still, nothing. I did this for 2 or 3 more trees, till on the 5th tree, I walked up, ripped off a strip of bark, and there in front of me were 2 rare black beetles. I took one in each hand and turned to return to my collecting tin at the first tree. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a 3rd black dot. I turned, and there, another rare specimen. I couldn't bear to lose it. I looked at the beetle in my right hand, then at the beetle in my left, and then an idea went from my head to my hands faster than I could think. I popped the beetle in my right hand into my mouth and reached out and grabbed the 3rd beetle off the tree. Then, a terrible taste filled my mouth. I spit out the beetle in my mouth, dropped the beetle in my right hand, and ran back to the tree, the first tree. I put the beetle in my collecting tin and then returned to the 5th tree. I looked around, but in the end I returned home with 1 beetle and a terrible taste in my mouth. At Cambridge, I met a man named John Henslow, the botany professor. We became good friends, and one summer, I received a letter from him when I was coming home from a hunting trip. Dear Charles, I was wondering if you would like to take the position of unpaid naturalist upon the HMS Beagle. It will be leaving in November. It will go to South America to do mapping, circle around the world, and then return to Europe. In total, a 2-year trip. I sent my answer back immediately, which was totally, unwaveringly, absolutely yes. The trip was delayed by 2 months because of weather, but in December of 1831, we were off. And as soon as we left, I was plagued by terrible seasickness. For the rest of the trip, I would feel this way whenever we were on water. In fact, by the time we reached our first port, I was afraid I would have to get off. But then nature kicked in. The breeze, the beach, the butterflies, it was all so amazing. And so I decided I could stick through it. It was worth it. Of the many great things that happened on the long voyage of the Beagle, there was one that will stay in my mind forever. The Galapagos Islands. They were amazing. As soon as we stepped off the boat, it was like walking into a brand new alien island. I collected bird specimens and kept them in my already cluttered room, preparing to study them when we got back home. But one of the most interesting things on the Galapagos were the tortoises. After a bit of studying, I realized that the tortoises from the different islands had different shells. Could it be that each island had a specific environment that the turtles adapted to on that specific island because they couldn't interbreed with the turtles from the other islands? This was where my theory, the one that I came to talk to you about today, really started forming. Eventually, we had to leave the Galapagos. I was disappointed, but we went under the Horn of Africa, returned to South America to do a bit more mapping, and then finally returned to Europe. I was relieved. The originally planned 2-year trip had taken 5. I moved in next to my brother Raz in London and quickly sent in my bird specimens to professionals. The results were strange, to say the least. There were 15 different species of finches just from the Galapagos. Could it be that just like the turtles, the finches had evolved to fit the specific environment of their island? My theory came together even more. And then I read Tom Malthus's essay. He said that a species will create too many of one generation, and then only the strongest would be able to survive and reproduce. My theory came together. The pieces were forming. And then I married my childhood friend, Emma. And a couple of years later, our family had grown too large for our home in London, and so we had to move to the Down Estate. It reminded me of my home in Shrewsbury, and that's why we decided to live there. I spent the next couple of years studying my theory, forming it, creating it, writing down wherever I was in small notebooks. And then I got bored, and I decided I didn't want to study the origin of species anymore. I wanted to go do something else. So for the next 8 years, I studied barnacles. I wrote 4 volumes on them, actually, if you'd like to check them out. But then my dear daughter Anne died. It was tragic, and her death haunts me to this day. But it got me back to work. I continued on the origin of species. I worked on it day and night. Eventually, I was close to finishing it. My friends urged me to publish it, but I said no. It must be perfect. Then I received a letter from a man named Russell Wallace. He said that he had combined the works of Malthus and Lyell to create a theory. He said that a species, an individual, will be born with a mutation, and if that mutation is beneficial, then it shall be passed on to the next generation, spreading through the species or creating a new species. I had been working on this theory for the past 20 years, and this man had just asked me to help him publish the same thing. I was furious with myself for not publishing sooner, furious with him for figuring it out, but his needs came before mine, and I agreed to help him publish. But before I could, my friends, Lyell and Hooker, convinced me that I should present with him to the Linnaean Society. So we did. I started working more than ever, all the time, never even taking a break, trying to finish my book, getting it perfect like I had always wanted it to be. And then it was done. 20 years of work, wrapped up like that. And so I sent it out there, published it, and it was a hit. It sold 1,250 copies on the first day. There was some controversy, but the backup of my friends in the science world, such as Lyell, helped get through the controversy to help it become more popular, the theory become more popular. I'm not much of a people person, and I would like to return home now, but before I go, are there any questions?
Carry out random acts of kindness with no expectation of reward, safe in the knowledge that someone might do the same for you. That was always my logic, being a person and a princess. I don't go by the rule book. I lead by the heart, not the head. And that's what I've always hoped to teach people, especially my own children, William and Harry. I'm a mother and then a princess. I became a princess July 29, 1981, wife to Prince Charles of Wales. I was only 16 at our first meeting. Prior to that, he was dating my older sister, Sarah. Only after a few years, we started our relationship, and then he proposed to me. I said yes, because at the time, I thought we were in true love. But his true love was actually Camilla Parker Bowles. But at the time, I didn't know that, so of course I said yes. He proposed to me with a beautiful diamond sapphire ring. That day will be remembered forever. Our wedding was known to be a fairy tale wedding. I remember having to practice walking in the veil because it was 25 feet long. And if I didn't practice, I could have tripped while walking down the aisle. Over 750 million people were known to watch from around the world. Only the next summer in 1982, we had our first son, William, and then 2 summers later, we had Harry. My boys are the light of my life. I tend to have them grow up in a more informal way. That meaning, I will take them to school myself instead of having the nannies take them. Take them to different events, parks, amusement parks as well. I want them to know that there is more beyond the palace walls, which is something I should have thought of before marrying Charles. But of course I didn't at the time. Being of the part of royal family means attending different events. Like in 1985, I was invited to Great Britain's first AIDS Medlex Hospital, where I was pictured shaking the hand of an HIV-positive patient. No protection, no gloves, nothing. One of my fondest memories. Because that picture was known to change the perspective on how HIV and AIDS is spread from person to person. I still go bedsides to different charities and hospitals and make bedside visits with the patients. Also in 1985, I was invited by First Lady Nancy Reagan to the White House, where I got to dance with John Travolta. I was wearing a beautiful blue velvet dress, which is now known as the Travolta dress. I also love to go help out with different charities, like the homeless shelters. I like knowing that I'm helping the youth find jobs, food, and shelter. I'll even bring my sons with me along to help there. I guess charities is one thing that I will and always will love, which is probably why I'm connected to over 100 different charities. Now, Charles and I are not faithful to our marriage, which is another reason why I love charities, because of the time it takes away from Charles and I. We are not faithful. We do not love each other the way a wife and husband should, which is why in 1992 we separated. Not divorced, just separated. I needed time to myself, time to think, because our marriage with me and him was more of a convenience for him, because his parents pressured him into marrying me, because his mother and his father, Queen Elizabeth, she saw me to be a proper and suitable fit for the royal family. Well, I don't know if she still thinks that, but who will know? And the paparazzi. Having people follow you everywhere you go, taking photographs, asking and yelling what's going to happen next, it gets overwhelming. It gets uncomfortable. Sometimes you don't even want to go outside because of them. It's as if they always have something to watch you do, something, you just take one step and it's going to be photographed, because as a lot of you may know, I am the most photographed woman currently. So it makes it overwhelming to go different places. But I cannot let them take over my time with you. Before I go, I have a few thoughts and comments to share. I am like a free spirit. Some don't like that about me, but that's who I am. So when I have to go by certain rules, it's hard for me. I like to go by my own rules. And, of course, I'm not like a typical princess. But having little girls look up to you, and having children in general waiting for your help is amazing, because children will always have a special place in my heart. Family is the most important thing in the world. So when I had my own, it was amazing. Now before I go, do you have any thoughts or comments to stick with me?
Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Hello, and I am Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When I was 5 in 1934, I had a friend, and we would play every day. One day, I walked up to his house, all excited, ready to play. I knocked on the door, and his father opened and gave me a disapproving look. I asked, "Can I play with my friend?" He told me, "No, because you're a Negro, you're going to a Negro school. My son is white, and he's going to a white school." And whoosh, slammed the door in my face. I didn't know what to think. I ran home crying, and I told my parents what happened. My mother said, "Martin, you're as good as everyone else. Just remember that." Then I started noticing things. Why only water fountains, colored water fountains? Why only restaurants, colored restaurants? And on a bus, a white section and a black section. These were all part of the Jim Crow laws, which means things separate but equal, when it really wasn't equal. And matter of fact, when I was in high school, I rode the city bus with my professor. We paid our fare, we sat down, all the other seats were filled, but white people kept on coming on. The bus driver told us, "Boys, get to the back!" And we had to stand at the back of the bus for 90 minutes straight. I will never forget that moment. When I was 15, I graduated high school and went to Morehouse to start college. I read an essay by Henry David Thoreau called Civil Disobedience, where I learned to refuse to cooperate with such an evil system. I also read about Mahatma Gandhi, where he believed in peaceful protest and used them to save India from the British. So, I started taking these thoughts and my Christian upbringing to fight back, to start the Civil Rights Act. And December 1955 was my chance. I started Boston University, where I met Coretta, which we moved to Montgomery, Alabama, and had our first child, Yolanda. I was a minister at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was fined and arrested for not giving up her seat for a white man and disobeyed a police officer. That's when the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, wanted to use Rosa's case to fight back, which was when they invited me to help lead the Montgomery bus boycott. We paid the same fare, but we were treated differently. We had to get off the bus, go around, go onto the back doors to get to our section, because we couldn't go through the white section. We had to give our the first few rows of the black section. White people can go too. And the people in that section would have to get up their seats and go stand at the back. So, we gathered the community and we asked, are you treated differently even though we paid the same fare? Well, we learned it's better to walk in dignity than ride in humiliation. So let's not ride the buses. We walked, we rode our bikes, we took cabs. People that had cars gave free rides, but we did not step a foot on the city bus. We were hoping that the Montgomery would lose too much money where they could not pay the bus drivers, or they would have to break that rule, which eventually it did. This lasted for a year. Between December 1st in 1955 and December 21st, 1956, and a lot of violence happened in that year. My house was even bombed with my wife and child inside. Luckily, they survived. Then, the case was taken to Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court ruled that there would be no segregation on Montgomery buses because it's against the Constitution. Now that was our first victory. Then we aimed for the restaurants, which was really nice, and we did sit-ins in white-only restaurants. We were refuse-serviced, we got dumped hot foods all over us, and were arrested. We kept going on because we were still making progress. In 1963, the NAACP held a March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom because we were giving bad jobs. We didn't get the same amount of wages just because we're a different color of skin. We did not have a lot of freedom because we're a different color of skin. So we led the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where I gave the I Had a Dream speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial and 500,000 people, white and colored. I explained, I have a dream where my 4 little children will live in a nation where they're judged by the content of their character and not by the content of their skin. A year later after that, in 1964, I won the Nobel Peace Prize. I was the youngest man to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And there are a lot of emotions combined with that. Amazement, pride, confidence, happiness, determination. In that same year, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. That was 4 years ago. Even though our mission has completed, we still have a lot of progress to make. The Vietnam War is still going on, and I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, protesting to get sanitation workers more wages. But I remember one thing. The time is always right to do what's right. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to go to the balcony to get some fresh air. But before I do, any questions?
Faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. Have you really found faith? Oh, Vinny, my dear sister, how can you say you trust God? There is no science to prove it. If it can't be proven with facts, how can it be true? I cannot believe in it. I refuse to stand up in church and say I wish to be saved, and I will not fake my faith. I am one of the lingering bad ones. I spend my days writing poetry and doing science, so I believe that anything true can be proven by looking through a microscope or doing research. I do not know how you trust God. Yes, I believe that the good things of this world come from God. Yes, it is He who puts the halo over the head of the good man, but isn't it also He who causes the eyes of the bad man to lower to the ground like an ashamed dog? Still, I believe you trust in God as well as this faith you have found. And at times, I have to admit, I think I envy you. And all the others, Vinny, our entire family. I think I envy your ability to put your fate in hands other than your own. When we were growing up, I had to take my fate into my own hands. I spent day after day looking out the window at the graveyard, becoming more and more acquainted with death. This caused troubling thoughts with me, and I had to put my fate in my own hands, and I could choose to let these thoughts drive me insane, or I could find a way to channel them. I did this by writing poetry. I put my emotions into my writing. This became a habit, and I did the same thing when war broke out after South Carolina seceded. I wrote many poems about the war, and this is one of them. It feels a shame to be alive when men so brave are dead. One envies the distinguished dust permitted such a head. The stone that tells defending whom the Spartan put away, what little of him we possess in pawn for liberty. The price is great, sublimely paid. Do we deserve a thing that lives like dollars must be piled before we may obtain? Are we that wait sufficient worth at such enormous peril, as life dissolved for us in battle horrible? It may be a renown to live. I think the man who died, those unsustained saviors, present divinity. This war is going on, and my friend, Mr. Thomas Higginson, is fighting in it. He commands a regiment. I remember just last year, I sent Mr. Higginson 2 of my poems, along with a letter. This letter. Mr. Higginson, are you too deeply occupied to say if my verse is alive? The mind is so near itself, it cannot see distinctly, and I have none to ask. Should you think it breathed and had the leisure to tell me, I should feel quick gratitude. Oh, Vinny, if you believe my words to be alive, would you share these thoughts with me? I wish my words to be alive. I want my poetry to have a soul and carry breath. And I wonder, if the world were to ever read my poems, would they think my words to be alive? Now, I apologize, because I have to get back to class. I fear I'll be late. But before I go, does anyone have any questions?
Hi there. I'm going to tell you a story that really affected my life. When I was trolley in Mexico City. There was a streetcar right next to the trolley. The street was not wide enough for the trolley that I was in the streetcar. And suddenly, crash, boom, boom, the streetcar and the trolley crashed. Many people died. I was very injured. A steel handle impaled me through the hip. My pelvis and spine were fractured. At that time, I wanted to become a doctor badly. Because of that, I couldn't. I had to stay in the Red Cross hospital for several weeks. After I returned to the Casa Azul, my beloved home, I had to wear a full body cast for 3 whole months. It was very tiring and painful. Since my father was a part-time painter and I was in bed a lot because of the body cast, my mom gave me an easel so I could paint. Put a mirror over my head so I could see myself. I painted myself since I was mostly lonely and I also knew me best. I love painting my eyebrows. In fact, most of my paintings were self-portraits. Then I got married to famous painter Diego Rivera. I first met Diego when I was in high school. I was in the group called Red Caps. We always wore caps. We liked to play tricks on Diego. Diego came to my school to paint murals. He was twice my age. When I grew older, I showed Diego some of my paintings. Diego soon became my art teacher. Soon after that, we fell in a romantic relationship and we got married. I wanted to have kids, but because of accident, I couldn't. We moved to America in New York for Diego's work at the Museum of Modern Art. Diego was a house in America. There were 2 parts. There was a bridge that connected them but also separated. I worked on one side, Diego stayed on the other. I was always taking care of Diego when we were traveling. I didn't have any time to paint. That's when I painted for my dress paintings. It represents on one side America with pollution, and the other side Mexican culture. Finally, we came back to Mexico. I was so happy. I wasn't really happy in America. I'm going to tell you a story about my childhood. It also leads to now why I wear a lot of Mexican jewelry and dresses. When I was 5 years old, I had polio. My leg got super thin. My parents made me do bicycle riding, swimming, soccer, running, and even boxing, but my leg never got better. The people in my neighborhood called me Vita Peddler. So I always wear a special sock and long dresses to cover my leg. Anyhow, so when we came back to Mexico, I was super happy. My marriage with Diego was not usual. People called us Alvin and Deb. Me and Diego separated a few times, but we always got back together. There have been 2 great accidents in my life. The trolley and Diego. Diego was by far the worst. Before I die, I hope people like you. Live your life. Be la vida. And before I leave, do you have any questions?
June 28, 1778, the disorganized 1st Division of the U.S. Continental Army was under the command of General George Washington, and we were losing. The 100-degree heat and dire circumstance made his decision here vital to the survival of the Army. I argued that we should stop the retreat started by General Charles Lee and launch a counterattack against the British General Henry Clinton. A win here at Monmouth Courthouse could help the Americans immensely. Here, in Washington, D.C., you know me as Marquis de Lafayette, the French officer who helped General George Washington win the Revolutionary War. But I want to prove to you how in doing so, I gained glory and honor. The first time I sought glory was at the age of 8 in 1765, when I first heard of the beast of Gévaudan. This horrific, hyena-like creature terrorized citizens all over France, particularly in and around the area of Gévaudan. Hundreds of people in southern France had their throats ripped out by the creature. I longed to be the one who found and killed the beast. Every walk I took, I eagerly wished I could meet the beast. This desire followed me everywhere for 2 years, until it was said to have been shot by a hunter with a silver bullet. However, this did not end my quest for glory. I sought it again in 1773 by securing the title of lieutenant in the French military. However, when the new Minister of War implemented military reforms, I was removed from my high-ranked position. Seeing no other path to glory, I set sail for America in 1777. Upon reaching America, I approached the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. I argued that I should be given the chance to fight for the American freedom. Even though they had too many French officers, a supportive letter from Benjamin Franklin and my wealth persuaded Congress to put me under the command of General George Washington. Over the next 2 years, I proved to him not only my commitment to the American cause, but also my expertise in the military. He began to follow my decisions and listen to my advice. On the morning of June 28, 1778, Washington ordered General Charles Lee to lead the 1st Division of the Continental Army in attacking the rear of British General Henry Clinton's forces. All was going according to plan until General Cornwallis arrived to reinforce the British. Even though success was still likely, Lee retreated. When Washington received news of Lee's retreat, he angrily dismissed him and took command of the army. Now he had a decision to make. Should he continue the retreat that Lee had started, or launch a counterattack against the British? I argued that we had to fight here. We had to beat the British. But Lee still agreed with his decision to retreat. Finally, Washington made up his mind. When we can win, we must fight. Prepare the men to battle. And ready the artillery to fire. All day and all night, we barraged them with cannon fire. By morning, they were gone and had retreated to New York. Even though the casualty numbers were the same on both sides, I consider this a win because we held our ground and forced them to retreat. Over the next 3 years, I continued to help the American Revolution. In 1781, I was given 1,200 troops in Virginia. General Cornwallis chased me all over the state, but he never once caught me. Finally, he gave up and set up camp in Yorktown, Virginia, along Chesapeake Bay. Seeing an opportunity, Washington ordered the French Navy to seize control of Chesapeake Bay and ordered me to approach Yorktown from the south. Washington then trapped him from the north. On October 9th, we surrounded General Cornwallis and began an 8-day battle that would end the Revolutionary War. On October 14th, Alexander Hamilton and I stormed the last British redoubt, virtually ending the war. The British were able to last a couple more days, but finally surrendered on October 17th, 1781. We won. While I wanted to continue to help the American cause and finish off the British regiments in America, Washington argued that I would be more supportive to the American cause in France. And so, I returned home. Once home, I continued to help the newly formed United States of America, but I also helped my own people. I worked to improve the lives of lower and middle class citizens. But I openly supported the aristocratic monarchy. However, there are some Republican revolutionists who did not think that I was doing enough, and they wanted the king removed entirely. Before things got worse, I left France for Austria in 1791, and none too soon, because the following year both the king and queen of France were beheaded. I was only able to return to France in 1798, when Napoleon Bonaparte gained control. It was then that I sat down for a quieter life. I was only able to return to my political career 10 years ago, in 1814. Since then, it was then that I joined the Chamber of Deputies. Last year, when I was removed from the Chamber of Deputies and invited to come tour America, I began planning my tour, and that leads me to now. I'd like to close by saying, when you gain glory and honor, you leave a lasting impression on the world. Thank you.
My name is Jack Lewis. I am here because I have been asked by the British Broadcast Company to give a series of radio talks about the natures of Christianity. I am no clergyman. I have no spiritual authority. In fact, I am a former atheist. But as a former atheist, I am well acquainted with the subjects of faith and doubt. Further, I believe that there has never been a more important time to talk about these things and the natures of the Christian faith. We are in the midst of the most horrific war human history has ever seen. It originates from the belief of no moral law or law of nature. It is perpetrated by people who no longer believe in right or wrong. Without any proper credentials, you perhaps would like to know something of my own story. I was born on the 29th day of November, 1898 in Belfast, Ireland. I had a rather unremarkable childhood. I grew up in the church, but abandoned any pretense of faith as a teenager. Further, I found the services boring. Though in 1915, I began studies at Oxford University. I loved university life. But that life was quickly shut down due to the start of the First Great War. As all young men were in that day, I was called upon by war. And as all young men are now, I was greatly changed by war. War creates no absolutely new situation. It simply aggravates the permanent human situation to where we can no longer ignore it. Human life has always been lived on the edge of a precipice. I learned that for the first time when I was wounded. When I recovered, I returned to Oxford, completed my degrees, and accepted a position teaching English at Magdalen College. During those years, I spent a great deal of time with two chaps named Ronald Tolkien and Hugo Dyson. You perhaps heard of Ronald. He recently published a work of fiction under the name of J.R.R. Tolkien. Through the patient and persistent conversation of Ronald and Hugo, I became a theist. You must picture me, alone in that room, Magdalen College, night after night, feeling whenever my mind lifted even for a second from my work, the steady, unrelenting approach of whom I so earnestly desired not to meet. That which I had greatly feared had at last come upon me. In the Trinity term of 1929, I gave in and admitted that God was God. And I crept down and knelt and prayed. That night, perhaps the most dejected and reluctant convert in all of England. I didn't truly convert, if you will, for another 2 years. The date was September 25th, 1931, and I was in the motorcycle sidecar of my brother's. When we set off to the zoo, I did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. But when we reached the zoo, I did. No one should infer anything about my brother's skill with a motorcycle. But I do believe, somewhere on that ride, I was awakened. I was awakened to humanity, and the brokenness of humanity. I was awakened to love and a God of love. It takes courage to live in this society of mortals. I recently published a piece called Screwtape Letters. It is about a demon named Screwtape, teaching an adolescent demon named Wormwood on how to become a proper demon. Their boss, of course, is the devil. At one point in the book, Screwtape writes this: "Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point," which means at the point of highest reality. A chastity or honesty is only chaste or honest on conditions. Pilate was merciful until it became risky. And the riskiest thing in this world is to love. To love takes courage. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure in keeping your heart intact, you must give it to no one. Lock it up in a casket or coffin, in dark, safe, airless. But in that dark, safe, airless, motionless coffin, it will change. It will become unbreakable, irredeemable, and impenetrable. This is what has happened in Nazi Germany. Hearts have become unbreakable, irredeemable, and impenetrable. And I'm afraid it is happening in Britain as well. We are losing the courage to love and to be loved by others. Because to be loved by God, not merely pity, but delighted in, as an artist delights in his work, or a father in a son. It is something that our thoughts can hardly sustain, but so it is. I do believe what I was truly awakened by is the love of God, the weight of glory that flows from faith. Because to have faith in Christ doesn't mean trying to do all that he says. There would be no sense in saying you trusted a person if you would not take his advice. Thus, in another sense, not trying to do all that he says. Not trying to get to heaven as a reward for your actions, but simply acting in a certain way because the first faint gleam of heaven is already inside you. Though before, I do not know what will happen next in my life. Though I would like to write something that would encourage the next generation of faith. I'm picturing 4 children stepping into a land of talking animals, evil witches, dwarfs, and a lion named Aslan. A good and loving lion that can be called upon when the forces of evil seem unstoppable, but also a lion for whom you must be careful, for he could destroy the entire earth in a single growl. Before I begin my broadcast, I should like to say one last thing, the very thing I should like to communicate most to my radio audience. We are humans. We may do wonderful things, but at the end of it all, we are just sinners. The only way to truly know God is to come to him and say, you must do this. I cannot. God bless you and thank you.
I love being a nurse because I love helping people. My mother was also a nurse here in Warsaw Ghetto. Until the Nazis came, I knew what I wanted to do, and that was help rescue Jewish people. The Jewish people in my Polish community are persecuted by the Nazis. The Nazis are taking Jewish families to concentration camps where they are gassed and tortured. Even worse, the kids going on the train thought they were going somewhere better, but then realized it was worse. I would see the train come back with all the kids' shoes, and I knew it did not lead to something better. I have rescued Jews from all over and provided them with false identity documents, shelter with Polish families, or other care orphanages. Seeing the kids lined up on the streets, begging for food, starving, tortured by soldiers or police, I couldn't bear watch innocent children screaming for their lives. So I helped by starting with my first Jewish child named Anna. The first time I saw her, she was on the streets with her brother. The second time I saw her, her brother had died. He died of starvation. So I went up to her and I asked her, would you like to go to someplace better? She agreed to come with me, so I brought her to a kind Polish family. I still knew I had to do more, so I stacked babies in boxes, and I didn't want people to know I had a Jewish child, so I had a dog in the truck that would bark over the baby's cries. Parents and children were so sad when they were separated, so I kept track of their name and where they were going so I could reunite them with their families after World War II. Also, when I rescued Jewish children, they had to know the Catholic religion, so if police ever caught them, they would ask about the religion. I taught them the Holy Cross, the Son and the Holy Spirit. More and more Jews were getting sent to concentration camps, and 92,000 Jews died in Warsaw Ghetto just from starvation. There were these huge camps with a bunch of bodyguards, so it wasn't easy to sneak in or out. So since I was a nurse, I would ask the bodyguards may I take a group of Jewish children to the hospital to check if they have this deadly sickness, typhus. They allowed me to take them because they didn't want the sickness passing around or they didn't want to get it. Soon enough, soldiers caught on to my plan. They wanted me to reveal the name of my associates. I would not give up the names. So the chief soldier ordered, "Break her legs." So I was laying on the ground, begging them to stop, but they hit and beat me with the bat. After that, they brought me to a cell with a bunch of other women that had been beaten too. Each of us had our own executioner and knew the doomed day was soon to come. With one single shot, my fate, my story, and my purpose almost came to an end. The others were not as lucky as I, but Zagoda members bribed my executioner with lots of money to let me free. After that, I still had to stay hidden, but by the end of World War II, me and my colleagues rescued about 2,500 Jewish children. Now before I go, I was taught that when someone is drowning, you don't ask if they can swim. You just jump in and help. Any questions?